So you're very welcome. I want to talk to you all this morning about hiring and retaining recruiters in 2020. This is a big challenge for most people I speak to all over the world. I want to share with you my insights from the customers we work with, the recruiters we speak to, the leaders we talk to daily as well, as to what's happening on the ground and what they're doing about it. So let's jump in. I want to start by talking about the bigger picture. We're all aware of this phrase that came out of the US in the middle of last year, the Great Resignation. It's also called the Great Reshuffle, the Great Retirement. There's been lots of phrases used in the media. I'm sure you've heard your version of it. But essentially what it is that it's very hard to hire talent now. And there's a whole bunch of reasons around it. The Great Resignation, as it's described, it focuses on both the increased number of people quitting their jobs, which hit all-time highs in the second half of last year, starting in the US, but we've seen that across Europe, across the world. I first saw this mentioned as in an article in Australia last September, October, saying, hey, this is coming to us here in Australia. Folks in Europe and the UK started talking about it in October, November as well. So we've seen this happen, and you probably feel it on the ground. And there's many reasons. One of the first being, we're 2 years into this pandemic, and in the first year, very few people moved jobs. You were afraid to move jobs. You were happy to have a job and still be in employment. It was also a time, particularly for us in Europe, let's say March 2020, so 2 years ago around now, because I was in Budapest at the end of February with many of you, with my eldest son as well. And it was the last flight I took before the pandemic. But things moved so quickly in that 4-week period. And by this time, 2 years ago, many of us thought our family, our friends, ourselves could end up dead in a few weeks or months. And hopefully most of you got through that. But we had such great fear, and we went through a trauma globally at the same time, this big trauma. And when you come out of this shared experience, you start reevaluating everything. You evaluate your relationships. The divorce shot up in most parts of the world in the 6 months after the first lockdown, for example, as we examined, do I want to be with this person here anymore? But when we begun to kind of look at the workplace, and as we tried to, after each successive lockdown, go back to the office in different forms, a lot of people started asking themselves, is this the company I want to work for? Is the boss I want to work for? Are these the people I want to work with? Do they share my newfound values and priorities? Organizations were indecisive about how they would handle a return to work policy. And so flexibility wasn't going to be guaranteed. There's still uncertainty about whether you can work remotely or what hours in a lot of organizations. And many of us got used to doing our jobs. If you were in a professional role that didn't require you to be, in front of the public, you realize you could do your job, and you balanced, dropping the kids to school, or maybe going to the gym in the morning, or just, not wearing shoes, right? And many of us just decided we don't have to wear shoes when we do our jobs anymore. And we didn't want to give that up. We didn't feel the need to give that up. And you saw in parts of the world, the retirement rates in the US in particular, when the data was quite good on this, you saw people who were eligible for retirement in the next 3 years, they accelerated their retirement because they were thinking, I don't want to work in this world. I'm only 2-3 years away. Let's just start my retirement early. So you had more retirees taking people out of the workforce. You had this, massive pent-up demand to find a new job with new motivations. And you also had on the bottom of this, the great acceleration, which was already observed pre-COVID, where there was a realization that the skills of tomorrow are mismatched to the skills of today. And to give you an example of, a retail store, think of your hometown or where you live in the city, a local retail store that would have just opened up to serve the people who came into the store. And the most tech that they would have had would have been their cash register. That organization had to change massively, or many of them did, in the early days of COVID. The retail owner, forced with her store being closed and having no income, started thinking, well, how can I reach my community? Maybe I can build a website and people can buy online and I can ship it to them locally. And so they had to figure out how to do that. Then once they had done that, all of a sudden they realized people from anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world could actually start now buying from me whenever it is I was selling. And all of a sudden they had to learn how to do logistics, ship things around the world, how to do marketing to promote themselves, build and manage a website, customer service orders. So you see even in a very typical retail store how the skills needed to change dramatically. So when we talk about this skill shift in tech skills, it's not just, you know, more people becoming coders. It's practical ways in which seemingly non-tech businesses had to become tech enabled literally overnight. And that gap still exists where we have more demand for those skills than we have supply. So all these factors drive the background we're in. And the data is extremely conclusive on this. And a bunch of stats here from different sources. You know, PwC saying 65% of US workers are looking for new careers. I thought this was a really interesting one here from Randstad UK. They survey people regularly and ask them, how confident are you in moving jobs in the next few months? 69% of people said that they're going to be moving jobs in the next few months. That survey response is normally 11%, so it's 6 times what it would be normally. So it's incredible. You look at Indeed data, and they show that the searches for remote work has gone up 5x since February 2020. I'd say probably even higher than that, right? It's going to keep increasing. So all the data suggests that people are unhappy. They're looking for a job, expecting to move jobs, expecting a pay rise. We are faced with massive inflation because of this, or certainly in part because of this, and pressure on the labor market. But it's also factored into the fact that we're living in a world where employees are disengaged and have been for some time. So globally, the measure of employee engagement pre-pandemic stood at 20%. And that wasn't consistent in every market. The US employee engagement was typically a little bit higher, 36%. But some countries, or in most countries where you had best practice organizations, like doing it really well, employee engagement can be at 73%, right? We see this, we just are announcing a survey to our staff and we have employee engagement levels in the 80s. And we worked really hard to get that back up. So we don't have the type of attrition that we're seeing in the market in social talent. Because we focus on engagement, which is how do you make sure that people who are working for you are happy and they're doing the right work, they feel motivated, they feel challenged as well, and they enjoy the environment they work in. And the absence of that is estimated to cost the global economy about $8 trillion a year, right? So it's really, really important to get right. Let's dive back into the recruiting world for a second, right? So in November, we run these often, hopefully some of you have seen them, live free events we call ST Live, Social Talent Live. And we had a group of 400 talent leaders on our call in November. And we asked them about this because we were talking about this topic. And we said, what are the biggest motivators for employees at the moment for you? And the top motivator, as you see here, was increased flexibility, but specifically working from home, because flexibility doesn't just mean working from home. It was just so far above everything else, right? That was the thing to solve for. And I spoke at a conference yesterday and Wednesday here in Dublin, the Talent Summit to 1,000 HR professionals. We talked about this exact same topic, that organizations are still not being definite about what flexibility means. They are operating in an environment where you have flexibility, but they're not necessarily committing to that being the norm forever. I'm currently interviewing somebody for a role with Social Talent who works for a big, large tech company in Dublin. And they're a really, really good company to work for. He's working remotely. He wants to build a house in the west of the country, like, 4-hour drive from Dublin, and live there with his partner. And his current employer, big US multinational, can't say for certain whether he will be allowed to continue work remotely because they haven't confirmed that policy. So you see how that disconnect makes somebody who's otherwise happy in their job, probably well engaged, all of a sudden say, well, I need certainty. So if an employer can give me certainty, I'm going to go for that. So then we asked those 400 same talent leaders about salaries. We said, assuming that salary levels have gone up, what percentage do you say they've gone up by? And 60%, right, more than half, said salary levels have increased by over 15% in the last year. Like, that's crazy, crazy stuff, right? Normal inflation is maybe about 3-4%. So salaries are going way up across the board, which is putting an enormous amount of pressure on organizations and on teams. And then we asked again about attrition, saying, what's the effect you're seeing on attrition, turnover? And we're seeing that, 74% said it was either higher or significantly higher than the previous year. So like big changes. Only 8% said it was lower. So we are all seeing this increased level of attrition in our teams. And then when we specifically asked about the pressure all of that puts on recruiting, higher salaries, more attrition, growth, change of skills, how are you kind of dealing with that? What are you doing to bolster your recruiting efforts? 2/3 said, we're putting more tech in. Right, we see this across the board, more tech to automate certain things, improve the quality of certain things, try and get more efficiencies. But just behind that, we have the number 2 response. We're developing our team with more learning and development, right? So rather than saying we just hire more bodies, it's saying we have to make everybody more efficient. So technology can help, but so does skilling, upskilling the recruiters. And then folks are hiring more recruiters. So they're hiring recruiters that are experienced, but they're more often hiring people who are not experienced. They've never worked in recruiting before and training them up. I'll come back to that. So we can't run a survey here right now, unfortunately, but if you can just use the chat, right? Just humor me. And of the following, for you, right? This is a question for you individually. What are the most important factors for you that would make you stay? So if you had them, you'd stay because you had them, or would incentivize you to leave because you don't have them, want to get them. So you can just pick one. Jump into the chat maybe. What would be the motivator that would make you stay if you have it, or make you leave because you don't have it? From this list: an opportunity to work remotely, the reputation of your company, opportunities to learn, opportunity to work in a new sector, opportunities for promotion, or money. Don't be shy. No problem. There's no right or wrong answer. Just love to hear what folks have to say. So it's not a scientific survey, but it's going to see put into this. So what would make you stay because you have it and you really value it and want to keep it, or make you leave because you don't have it and you want to try and get it somewhere else? It'd be so important to try and get it somewhere else. So a couple of responses already. Veronica saying learning, Message saying company's reputation. So feel free to jump into the chat with what you think, right? Or just have that in your head. What would you prioritize? I don't have to bite them and muff them while you do that. Give me 1 second. Isn't hungry work? Okay, so think about that, right? I'm going to come back to that again. I'm going to share some data with you on this specific question in just a second. Let's dig into the recruiter market. Hopefully some of you are aware of this. If you're not, this is good data for your teams, for your colleagues. In the summer of 2021, a recruiter called Amy Schultz observed on LinkedIn that there were, at that unique time in July, more postings for recruiters on LinkedIn than there were for software engineers. That had never happened before. By September, the Wall Street Journal in the US recorded that there were 148,000 job postings for recruiters in the US alone, which was double what it had been at the start of the year. So by the second half of 2021, we saw that the recruiting market exploded. Everybody needed more recruiters. We were bouncing back. Retail was coming back. Hospitality was coming back. Other industries were growing again. The economy was starting to roar again. And we needed people. We needed different people. We needed more people. We had people leaving their jobs, creating nutrition. And then recruiting teams are really, really trying to struggle. And most teams haven't been successful in doing this to the level they want. And it's caused a whole bunch of things. The recruiters are in high demand, low supply. And so most teams are overworked. So burnout is rampant because you're having to work more recs than you normally would have, more roles. You're so busy. And that causes you to be frustrated and potentially leave, which causes more strain on your colleagues because they've got to work more jobs as well. So burnout is rampant. It causes people to leave, which causes burnout for the rest of the team to be even worse, which causes more people to leave. Salary expectations are soaring. People are being poached for, I've heard recruiters being poached for double their salary, like crazy stuff, right? And then companies who are using external hiring firms, they're paying premium fees because those staffing firms have to hire people at a height. They're struggling, and it's a candidate's market, so you can charge higher fees. But money does matter, right? Matt Buckland, who's a good friend of mine, who runs a community in the UK called the DBR, Community for In-House Recruiters and HR Professionals. It's on LinkedIn. Go find it. You should join it. Matt puts really good data out there all the time. And he asked his network what does this look like just before Christmas? What's the salary inflation looking like? And he found that the average increase was massive, right? The average salary for recruiters was going up by 16%, right? So it's in line with what we're hearing about salaries overall. And you see the data here for years of experience. It's happening across the board. It's a weird anomaly for 3 years of experience. The 3 years of experience, it's not going so well, it turns out. So, but salaries are rising. This is before Christmas. They continue to rise after Christmas as well. And he also asked recruiters that same question I put to you a few minutes ago: what's important? And you saw money. Yeah, money came up and pretty much at the top, but joined kind of second. Right? So in terms of times it was ranked, was opportunities to learn, or wanted to basically learn. They wanted to get out there and to learn more, to be re-educated, upskilled. It was important to them that the company's reputation or the status. Work from home was important to them. Opportunities for promotion were important. And it's funny, I've asked the same question to many groups since the beginning of the year. And I found that the recruiters I've asked, it's almost neck and neck flexibility and money. And you never even have that neck and neck. Money would just always win out when you'd ask that in previous years. But I think we demand flexibility, not only for our candidates, but for us as well. So I don't know how many of you are working remotely at the moment, hopefully most of you, but how many of you know for certain you're allowed to continue working remotely on your own terms within as many days as you want going forward? And are you happy with that? Big disparity there between folks. So we've learned from our customers and talking about how they deal within the recruiting teams. So just focusing on the recruiting teams for a moment, that the three most important retention tactics, which also are of course going to be used to try and hire people, are money. You got to pay the right salary. Let's be honest. The offering of learning, development, and opportunities, and being flexible, giving flexibility to your teams. They're the three most important things. Let's dig in and talk money just for a second. Comp and bends is important. Okay, if you aren't paying somebody their kind of basic wage, then it doesn't matter how flexible you are, how nice you are, how great an employer you are. If somebody else gives them more money, they have to move on. So comp and bend matters. What's interesting though is it's not the primary thing. People won't just move for a higher salary or package. Of course, if it's crazy, if it's double, they kind of have to move, right? Maybe. But if it's just a little bit more, maybe even 10, 15%, and what they earn is okay at the moment, it's not going to be the number one factor. But you do have to address it, right? And we're seeing our customers just paying higher salaries, right? Gone up across the board. In the US, for example, the average salary or hourly rate for an experienced recruiter in the direct hiring world was $75 before the pandemic, or even actually a year ago it was $75. It's gone to about $110 per hour for a US recruiter. So kind of skyrocketed there. And if you look at the average agency or RPO staff level, they've gone up usually as well. We've seen teams introduce uncapped commissions or uncapped bonuses. We have teams giving them sign-on bonuses because, rather than increasing the salary of just new hires, which has a knock-on effect for the whole team currently working there, they're saying, let's bring them in on the same salary, but give them like a sign-on bonus of whatever, 10% or 20% of their salary. So you're an extra month free, perhaps, to try and get them to move jobs. Others are paying retention bonuses. So rewarding people for staying 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, increasing the retention bonuses the longer you're staying there. I know one of the big four firms in the UK did this recently in their recruiting team, and it worked. It slowed down the attrition in the team. They had to reward people who were there, more than a year because they were just seeing this huge churn, right? So it's a big factor. But opportunities to learn are really important as well. No one wants to stagnate in their role. It's the number one reason people leave a job is because they don't have opportunities to progress. And it's the number one reason that typically candidates accept a job is because there are more opportunities to progress. And L&D is just part of that. It's also promotions and interesting work, of course. But people want to learn. And what we've seen in the last year, as the market got really tight in recruiting, we see two different types of customers. We see a group of customers who say, we can't learn as much. We got to cut back on our learning because it's just so busy. These recruiters are working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. They can't make time for learning. And that seems to make sense. You're like, okay, yeah, that's kind of makes sense. You're busy. the most highly productive teams we've seen, which is largely the RPO, recruitment process outsourcing business, they've increased the amount of learning. I love this because faced with an increasing workload, they're saying, we got to get better at recruiting. We're not going to be able to just deliver this by working more hours. People will burn out. We've got to work smarter. So let's make sure we're doing our learning. So they've increased that. So it's a real important difference here. What is your approach? They're also increasing the spend on tech as well. So again, other ways to try and make your team more efficient. So they're championing learning as this. They're building recruiting academies, upskilling folks like people like Wilson HG, Manpower, Cielo, Randstad, Sourceright, Kelly, OCG, all doing those first time. Some of them are just doubling down on those. But it's really, really important there. The other piece is that they're also recognizing there aren't enough recruiters out there. And this will come be an important point before we close. The majority of recruiters being hired into teams at the moment, direct teams, agency teams, or PO teams, they've never worked in recruiting before. You know, they're not grads. They're not people who are fresh out of college, because there's a huge demand for those for all sorts of roles. They're people who used to have a different career. They're people who were food and beverage servers, store managers, restaurant managers, cooks, teachers, drivers, people who have resilience, who have comfort dealing with the public to a large degree, who are flexible, bright, and you teach them the recruiting stuff. Like, we have people using our platform to teach sourcers to be sourcers in 90 days. Like, I mean, be effective sourcers in 90 days. And hard to do that with somebody with no business experience. When you've got business and life experience, you transfer those core skills over. It's amazing what you can do. And they're the new breed of recruiters you're seeing out in the market here, right? They've never worked in recruiting before, certainly not pre-pandemic, and they're killing it. Uber, for example, is reskilling actors and athletes. You've seen like that being a really those pockets of candidates work out really well as recruiters, a type of recruiter. So low example for this is working. And then of course remote work. One of our clients in the US, a huge media company, they started having huge attrition in their team in the summer of 2021. And they were having a mix of office and work from home. And the business had to go to the CEO and say, I need license to tell my team they can work remotely forever if they wish to. And that wasn't the policy of the company, still is, but you had to do it, and it worked. It stemmed the flow. People were like, hey, if I can guarantee I can always work remotely, then yeah, I'll stay here. This works. That remote work is really, really important to a lot of people, to everybody, don't get me wrong, but making sure it's there for the folks who really, really rely on it is really, really important. And I mentioned our RPO customers. And I bring them up because time and time again, although our RPO customers make up only about 10% of our customers, they are typically the most efficient, and they deliver the highest results on scale. And if you're in-house and you're thinking, oh, I don't like RPO, they don't deliver the service I want them to do, trust me, on scale, compared to most companies, they really do, right? They have to be efficient because they work in a lower margin environment. They have to get scale. They have to figure out the right processes. They can't just waste. And they have to tend to be very efficient. I'll give you three examples here. Wilson HCG, based out of Tampa, Florida, but most of their team are international, actually most in Eastern Europe. They've doubled their recruiting team in the last year. They've invested in academies, early career programs, reskilling initiatives. They've incorporated Social Talent into their LMS to provide a more comprehensive L&D function. Pontoon, in less than a year, they completed 57,000 hours of learning. Insane, right? They've blended third-party content and different content they find elsewhere with our content platform, using some of the technology we have there to really build a blended, unique experience for their teams. Hudson made Social Talent their core element, and in doing so, reduced their ramp-up time by 2/3 by getting recruited up to speed, right? So, you know, that educational piece is really, really important. As I said, two types of people. People who say, I'm busy, and people say, I'm so busy, I need to do more. Then I'll ask you again to think about this question. Again, I don't have a survey that we can push live with you, but of the following skills for you, what are you going to prioritize? If you could pick some of these skills to prioritize this year that you're going to invest in or investing for your team, what would it be? Is it leadership training, more sourcing training, more business partnering, Do you want to have more technical or industry knowledge? Do you want to look at strategy, selling, negotiation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, network, or interviewing? What do you think are your most important priorities here? So think of those in terms of three. What would you pick? If you could choose up to three, what would you prioritize? Have a think about that. I'll share with you my thoughts in a second. But this is what people say they want from recruiters. There's a word cloud of about 100 live vacancies for recruiters I found out on Indeed. And you see what people ask for are things like, someone talent acquisition specialist who understands applicant systems, like who actually cares if they've ever worked with ETF before in this current market. I was at an event during the weekend. There was a team saying, we need to have recruiters who get to know, who understand social media. It's like, what are we, 2008 here? Like, come on. That's not the solution. Like, if that is a problem for you, you're in deep trouble. But, understanding social media, that's not the core skill that we need to look at here, right? So we need to really think about what we need. And when I look at our platform, I look at what our best customers are doing, what the focus areas they're looking at are. I see these types of skills pop up. Business partnering, for example. There has been such a move over the last few years as we've automated lots of processes, as we've got more efficient. You see that recruiters more and more have to be consultative. So on scale, in large teams, and I mean teams, of more than 10 recruiters, you absolutely have to split at the very least between recruiters who are aligned with the hiring managers and recruiters, often called sourcers, who are aligned with the candidate. You kind of can't be 360 doing both when you scale. And the business and talent advisor, TAP, or talent professional, they really work with the hiring managers and hiring teams in the business to understand their needs. They advise, they bring insights on salary level, what should the comp and bends be. They're designing the job specs with the business. They're then basically managing that expectation of process around a good assessment process. So it's much more around business partner. And then you work with your colleagues who have a deep understanding of the candidate market. They're sourcing, they're building analytics about the candidate market, what's happening there, and bringing that to you. On real scale, you have a third team, the kind of ops team, and then you'd have process administration, so scheduling and all those sorts of things as well. But that's a really big thing, really the number one thing to focus on. Here, you're going to keep going further into that advisory and business partnering area. Then the technical or industry knowledge. We saw a lot of folks at the beginning of the pandemic shift industries. What I mean by that, let's say you were doing recruiting for the motor industry, and all of a sudden you're like, well, that's dried up. Let's move into tech. Or you work in the motor industry and you realize tech is what you do now because it's changed from factory workers, right? And robotics into software. So having to upskill yourself, not in recruiting, because recruiting, the industry and the types of things and the words you look for and the types of candidates and the players who employs them, that upskilling has become really important, and keeping up to date. That gives you credibility back with the hiring managers and the businesses that you work on behalf of. Working, right? We all look the same. And this isn't just for agency recruiters. Agency recruiters get a network because the differentiation is often about the relationship. But in-house as well, are networking with hiring managers, building that relationship. Another reason why 360-degree recruiting doesn't work on scale is because someone has to focus on the relationship with the business, right? So that relationship building is really important. Diversity. All hiring must be inclusive with diverse talent. It's just table stakes, right? It's not an option. There isn't, I hope, more a team of they're the diversity person and the rest of us aren't. Well, there aren't diversity recruiters? What the heck, right? It just doesn't work. Interviewing. I've always been amazed, and I was amazed at myself, right? I never really focused on my interviewing skills and my training beyond what I learned my first year of recruiting. But how else are we experts in assessing talent? Unless we're really working on our interviewing skills, understanding the science, how to do really good intelligence that. And then lastly, I see a lot of it towards what used to be exec searching principles, longer time frames, longer courtships, more about career advisory for the candidate, less transactional. That's been pushed down into lower level roles and out into other roles in the business. I think you're going to see more of that, for priority roles in the business, we'll work less recs, be more high touch with a longer courtship and a different approach to it. So more of an exec hiring perspective. Then when you pull back on all this, right, I think we're at a point where more than half of our industry now is made up of folks who never worked in recruiting before the pandemic. They used to be teachers, restaurant managers, baristas, amateur athletes. And whilst the market is on fire and salary levels are going up, and can say, well, it's great to be a recruiter, I can leave my job and take my pick elsewhere. I don't think the spoils of the tight recruiting market are going to go to everybody equally. I think the people coming into the industry are probably best leveraged to take advantage of it. And particularly those who continue to develop, who push their skill development, push their education, strive for more, they're going to be the ones that win, right? So the winners and losers haven't been decided yet, and don't get left behind. And that's it for me. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join this breakout session.